Welcome back to Draw Process. I'm Ike, page 55 of First Sun and Sword today. Let's do it. And the thumbnails. These are also, sketches figuring things out. So there was a quick sketch of the Croc's head shoving Sword underwater, his hand on his face. I thought maybe I would show him underwater in that fashion, and then show Sun jam the sword into Croc's head in the next panel. And now here's idea number 2: the sword up in the air and then stabbing in. Now in the last page we never showed Sword's head actually underwater, and I did this thumbnail before I finished page 54. I thumbnailed this right after thumbnailing page 54, so I didn't know that yet. So we're going to make a change on the page from what I did in the thumbnail. I'm working out this shot. Okay, the dagger is in, or the short sword, I guess, is in King Croc's head. Sword is maybe underwater or just getting pulled out of the water, has just come up out of the water. His arm being pulled by Sun, who's straddling King Croc's neck. You can see how I'm building the movie, the images I would see in my head. Like, okay, I went back and I added a third panel. Okay, the eyeball of King Croc going dead. Maybe I can show that in its own shot. And then him getting pulled out of the water. I'm working out the poses and the camera angle there, but I'm not, it's beyond the original panel border because I'm trying to see what works. And you'll notice that I went with a much tighter panel on the final version. I captured just the most bare necessity of that shot, which is Sword's arm getting pulled up by Sun. All right. So you can see that I'm overdrawing. I'm drawing a little more detail and stuff than I really need to. And that's just habit. It's hard to break. I do see myself in the future moving towards simpler thumbnails, but sometimes figuring out these expressions and stuff, it helps me bring the story to life and feel like that I got the thumbnails right, that I have the plan for the page right. So sometimes it takes a little more rendering, and it's also like I just get caught up in the rendering or in the figuring out the forms. But it's not wasted time. This is like studying. This is working out the forms, so that I know that they work and that the composition works. Not totally wasted, though of course I want to get faster at it over time. I thought on the bottom set of panels there you have, Sun's worried face, a reassuring kind of look, smile-ish from Sword, and then Sun's reaction, a more calmed smile from Sun. So, in my mind, they don't really share dialogue. It's just a look, and the acting has to be just right. What does this look mean? Why is there this look? It can be kind of cheesy, like a father-son thing. They're not actually biologically related characters, but it could be cheesy. It could hit the right emotional tone of there's something communicated in that look that is meaningful, especially, to fathers and sons. But it doesn't come across cheesy. That should there be no dialogue, or should I add a little bit to get the right tone? And what is the tone? Like, they're not completely safe at this point, and they're not super happy. Like, they're stressed. They're just experienced trauma. Sword is in pain, and his foot is torn up still. And the woman, the dragoness, is still unconscious on the floor, but she could get up at any time. So, and they don't know what's happening outside. I mean, Fair was supposed to fight those people out there, but they don't know if she was successful or any of that. So you gotta, getting the right tone in the acting and everything. So onto the pencils here. Trying to keep it really loose at first. And I wasn't sure about my choices. I'm kind of thumbnailing on the page here because I had to change the thumbnails. So I didn't ink in the panel borders yet until I sketched things in and made sure I liked the position of the borders. We have here on the far left, the first panel is the upside down head of sword underwater, bubbles coming up. And then his view of sun with so it's not just showing the sun holding the short sword up, it's sword's POV looking through water, which is gonna distort sun, and seeing that sun's there with the dagger up. And then the shot that's just a clear shot of the short sword dagger going into King Croc's head. Not the clearest sequence to go from like looking underwater from outside of it to looking at a POV shot and then to just a normal shot that just shows the content, just shows what happened. But trying to take some chances at a little more unique storytelling, just putting a little more effort into those camera angles, those choices of the shots, showing his head underwater, showing sun distorted from a view underwater, a POV there. That's a nice extra effort, extra intentionality to the shots that hopefully readers appreciate. That risk-taking can end up making it more confusing for readers or not helpful, but it's worth trying, I think, because as you get better and better at it, you're going to get better at it. But if you play it safe, you're not going to get better at the more daring storytelling. So you might as well take a shot at it. Same thing with poses and camera angles. Like, it's easy to just do a dead eye level shot of every character straight from the front or whatever. But if you start getting a lot of variety in those angles and in the poses, it gets harder to draw. It's more daring to do so. But if you never start doing that, then you're not getting better at it. So you can play it safe, and your book can look more polished, but you're not growing. You're not getting as much better as you would if you would take more risk. And yes, we have, we want a finished book that is good to read, but, let's think of it this way. I enjoy like masterfully crafted and told stories, whether that's in writing and film and in comics. But I like it when the voice of the creator is what's masterful. It's like it feels like a unique voice. It feels a little risky and daring. So, at the same time, when a comic or film or whatever is a little too quirky, a little too strange, it can, or lacking masterful execution, then that can feel like a really indie project that doesn't quite hit emotionally. It's hard to connect with, but you might still enjoy it. It might become a cult classic. Like it can be useful. But they're very similar. It's just one is masterful, executed masterfully, and one is less self-aware, less intentional, in control. So that you develop the mastery over time. And that's the case for taking for being a little more daring. And so like it's not one or the other. It's not like play it safe, make sure you have perfectly executed finished comics, because that's the only way you're going to be successful someday. That's like not true. You can take those risks as you go. Let that be part of your development. Let it be, because it's not like you're just abusing the audience. You're not just like you don't have to be. It doesn't mean that you're just using them as your comic is simply practice for you to draw and improve. Now, you can read comics that feel that way, where it feels like someone just wanted to make a comic so that they could practice making comics and improve, and that's the only purpose it served. But that doesn't mean that's what you're doing when you use making comics as a learning opportunity for yourself, for taking risks and trying something new. Because that is also how you show that you are taking chances, that you are really storytelling, right? That the reader knows this is interesting. This is someone really saying something, both in the visuals, in the story, and the just designing of the panels and everything. So, yeah, one way that it helps me is to be more daring is I try to envision for the panels what I see in my mind, like the camera angle, the pose, the complexity of the shot that I see in my mind is what I try to draw. That way, I'm seeing things that are harder to draw than they're a little beyond my ability, let's say. Like for example, if you follow more of a structure to, these are the panel shapes I use, these are the positions I put the figures in. Like, okay, now this guy's talking, so I need a medium shot or close up of this character. I just draw them on the panel in this way because that's how I do it, dead on camera or whatever you do. Then you're just executing the formula that makes it easier for you to draw, makes it easier for you to hit a deadline. But it's not going to have you growing the same way as picturing it in your mind. Actually seeing your actors, your characters, be positioned in a space and how they're interacting and how that should be shown for that specific moment in the story, that to get the specific tone you're looking for, that you're not just following the guidelines you gave yourself, but letting the story inform those decisions. And by doing so, you will also end up having to draw more variety of poses and compositions and everything. So, I think that's useful to consider. So I went through the pencils and I did some very loose pencils of the whole page. And then I went back to the start and I'm adding the extra details into the pencils. Part of me likes the thought of getting more simple with my pencils and putting more trust in myself to execute the inks without pencils to trace, let's say. But I also know that the pencils is not simply there as a guide for my inks. There are decisions that I'm making, that I'm letting the pencil find decisions answers to problems. I'm letting the pencil find them by scribbling out the structure and sketching in some shading. It's it's not just making sure things are rendered enough that I can ink them, but it is bringing to life these things. And there's, you're allowed to erase. There's like this liberty and looseness that you can feel that I feel while penciling, that helps me be in that creative space, that it would be very hard to do that if I skipped to inks more quickly, because when inking, those are permanent, decisions in a way. So it's not wasted time, but we could put it this way: it is wasted time if I'm using the pencils, if I'm thinking about the pencils purely as for production purposes. Like I have to complete this step to get to the next step. That's its only purpose. If I think of it that way, then yeah, it's not. Then I'm going to consider speeding it up, or eliminating it. But if I see it as this much more engaging, creative process, then no need to rush it. You see here, you can see how narrow this panel is. This full width panel, very short in height. It is just wide enough to capture. You remember in the thumbnail, I drew this entire shot. You could see the entire crocodile head. You could see Sword's head, Sun's head, how Sun was positioned on King Croc. I sketched it in the thumbnail. I figured out the shot, but then here I've cropped it as tight as possible. It's just that arm coming out of the water, and Sun, his hands are still chained together. So that's why he's wrapped his arm around Sword's hand or wrist to pull him out of the water in the way that he did. But that is very, very tight panel. Not easy to execute, but again, I prepped that in the thumbnail, and I figured out how to set up that shot and crop it as tightly as possible. Yeah, same thing with this shot. Not easy shots. I wanted to capture King Croc's eyeball, so that you could see that dead expression, see that he's dead. I wanted you to see the short sword sticking out of his head in this shot, and see enough of the shapes of the crocodile to know what it is that you're looking at, but show very little of it at the same time. That, like, get that camera tight on the two figures. And I got to get Sun and Sword positioned where I can still see King Croc's head and that sword in his head. Still see his eyeball, hopefully. That's going to be... I'm struggling to make that fit as we get to Sword there. So, and then, working out the structures of these figures. The more I've been studying anatomy, the more... in some ways, the more difficult this gets, because I've actually been drawing less from a structural and a gestural way of thinking, and more, structural in one sense, and now it's more, I get hung up on, I think of the anatomy and the roundedness and the way things connect and overlap. So, like, I get hung up on these details, and then I can end up with a stiff figure. I kind of forget the gesture, forget the structure. So it makes things more complicated, like a shot like this, that's a unique angle on Sword's neck and shoulder. It is harder to capture those details of it, whereas in the past I probably would have stayed. I wouldn't have put as much detail into his muscles and bone structure because I wasn't as good at it. and it would just kind of come natural to me to leave it a little looser. Whereas now, I'm leaning towards defining all that, which isn't necessary, really. It's just personal, choice. But my personal tastes are changing according to what I've been focusing on lately. So it's not a bad thing, but I just see that happening in me. I'm sure other people can relate to that, and it's worth it to me. I think that this whole scene, this is a long part of the comic, but this whole time, Sword has been down to his underwear, and he's a muscular character, and so I had that was a lot of musculature and like figure to capture. When he's dressed, it's a lot easier to not have to put all those details. But it was good for me to do this because after putting work in on these pages with so much detail in the figure, I know that once I put his clothes back on, I'm going to be able to capture some of those details through the clothing or in his neck that shows out of the clothing. I'm going to lean a little more towards those details, which to a degree that makes characters feel more alive, more constructed, connected, right? Like this works well for things that are meant to be like either horror or disgust or sexual. If you want to create a certain feeling in your audience, if they can feel if they can see these constructed details of a human body, it can really help with that feeling. I'm thinking of like an eyelid. If you like drew the actual thickness of that lid going over that sphere of an eyeball in a close-up of the eye, let's say, but like those little details, and it would be like, oh, this person's made of stuff, which could either be arousing or disgusting or whatever, so I think it can help. And of course, my style, I use a dead line. And my pen work is pretty much a dead line, meaning that it's just one line thickness at all times, and I create depth and weight through blocks of black. And that's another thing that's been happening is as I've been moving more towards anatomy details and in a way cartooning the anatomy details that are more in reality are more like rounded, and I don't know how else to put that, but the details are more rounded, so then my lines end up more rounded, and like when you want to put more detail, let's say into fingers, and they're not just rectangles, but there's knuckles, and there's thicker and thinner spots and wrinkles and so on, and you want to like do that. It starts to lend itself to using a brush stroke, lines that have varied thickness. You can capture like where one muscle connects into the bone or like overlaps another with some feathering of the line, and I don't do those details. So as I'm putting more of those details in, I run into problems of the challenges of doing so with a deadline. But I think it'll be good. It'll be interesting to see how I navigate that. I think of like manga, like Lone Wolf and Cub or something. That's a lot of that varied brushwork with capturing some physical forms, and details. I think of those kinds of styles versus like a Mike Mignola, like that maybe have been more leaned towards in the past. And I see myself kind of marrying the two. So this confusion or this tension I feel between the two could actually be a good thing that I should embrace, because it could be that this is the discomfort of the birthing process of becoming and creating this new way of doing it, or my own way of doing it. And sometimes what feels like that birthing process and that becoming is to leave out more details and get more simple in my line. And lately it's been to get more detailed in my line, to add more details. And so, and I guess more detailed in my line, more variety. I have rounder lines mixed with these harder lines, but it's not as hard as they used to be, as geometric and sharp edges as it used to be. So, yeah, I see myself changing, and I can identify some of the reasons why. It has to do with my practice and the things I'm focusing on. That is fostering a certain kind of development in me. It generates some discomfort, but and maybe some of that tension between styles. But yeah, it feels good. It feels it's decent. It's a decent path. Maybe it isn't the best one I could have chosen, but it feels right. I'm engaged in it. I'm gonna stick with this path for now. And in the future, it may not be the right path anymore. I might move back towards gesture more and composition and stuff rather than anatomy. Yeah, we'll see. And here I am inking the page. Yeah, I was talking about these lines, and I see I've already started it here. Definitely getting more comfortable with physical forms. And my anatomy, by no means correct and perfect, but thinking about how this went for me versus, there were just, I don't know how many pages back, maybe it would be like 25 pages back, which for me is like almost 6 months. I had to draw a scene where Sword and Sun were sitting at a table, and they had to cut their hands open, and there was just a lot of hands on the page in different positions, and kind of awkward positions of holding a knife and trying to cut, and you got to capture that correctly. I remember that being a little more challenging than it feels now. That now these complex poses feel pretty easy, and I notice the details I'm putting in that I wasn't as comfortable with before. On panel number 4 there, Sun has wrapped his arm around Sword's arm, and just the way that his deltoid is like, Sun's deltoid is kind of like defined above the skin of his arm where it's folded over Sword's hand. That just feels a little more knowledgeable. It defines things a little better than what I used to do. It's kind of like developing a much stronger vocabulary. I'm able to use, instead of just good, bad, okay, like happy, sad, instead of these like rigid words for describing things, I've been broadening my vocabulary substantially. But when you do that, there's also an awkward time when, that writer or writing student starts to just throw in all these big words they've been learning, and you're like, oh, like, okay, that's a nice big word, but you clearly are just learning this and throwing it in, and it's a little awkward at first. But maybe you have to go through that growth period. to start using those new words. And it's kind of like that with these added details I'm putting in. This is more vocabulary that I can put to use, and I just got to get more masterful with it to put it to use in the best ways possible. There's a case to be made for using a simpler vocabulary, but I'm all about growth too. That we grow in more honest communication, authentic, expressing what's really in us. But we can also grow in our vocabulary. And then that's kind of the metaphor for what I'm doing right now in my art development. Yes, and I think I see improvements in my backgrounds on this scene from the start of it. The stone walls and the shadows, they just feel a little more like stone. They feel like a little more solid. And I mean, that I don't know if that's specifically my development and improved skill, or if it's just because I've been stuck in this environment for so long that I'm just getting a lot of practice at this one environment. So I think I'm gonna sit down pretty soon and just practice some different textures. I'm not gonna look at other people's comics to see it, how they do it. I want to actually look at the photographs of these things. But rocky structures, or rocks on the ground, or grass, trees and leaves, and bark, especially these environmental structures and textures. I want to see how I can capture those, and just get better at it, because there's a lot of cartooning I do. There's a lot of lines I put in with the inks that I didn't plan out in the pencils. And if I just get that vocabulary developed where I know, okay, I need some rocky shapes here, and I need some this and that shapes here, leaf shapes here, I would like to improve my ability to execute those on the page, just made up. And that is a bit gimmicky. It's following kind of, just one method, but it's vocabulary I can use. So I see that that would improve things. The same way I've improved, some of these details in the bodies, the anatomy. I could create more vivid, defined textures in the environment without adding more lines. It doesn't have to be a lot more detail, because I want to keep it a simple style. But what lines I do put can be more instructive, so informative. I think I have finished my logo for the book. I haven't shared it yet because I'm not positive that I'm happy with it. I think I'm going to draw the cover first and then see the logo, actually on the book. Maybe even print a test copy of that and make sure I really do like how that's going, because whatever I go with for the logo, I just want to be able to stick with that forever, for a long time. So make sure I really like that. But I got it done in the past week, I think, so that's nice. And then I need to get the cover done and 5 or so more pages and write the next one. Get that going. There's the finished page. Really, I think getting better here with my colors, my values, trying to keep the lighter and darker values, focusing the eye where on the things that matter, separating foreground and background a little better with those values. So that's it. That's my thoughts for the week, the finished page, my work for this week. Be the practice of your art. Encourage others to do the same. See you next week.